Awesome. Welcome everyone to our first episode of Jumpstart Distilled Live. I have here with me Rob Derricotte, the COO and co-founder of Amblyotech. I'm really excited, but before I really let Rob truly introduce himself, I kind of want to give a little context to this series and get you guys excited about all the great content that is to come. So Jumpstart Distilled is going to be a series that covers all sorts of topics ranging from early stage venture, entrepreneurship, innovation, and healthcare. And really the goal of this series is to distill down those topics to make it really accessible to everyone listening, whether you are a first-time founder or a very successful entrepreneur that's been around the block a few times, or a mentor, or really anyone looking to get engaged with our network. I'm excited to have you here, and I'm excited that Rob is my first guest. It was an obvious choice for me because one, Rob was in the first group of companies that I got to work with when I first joined Jumpstart in 2016, and he and his co-founder Joe were fantastic additions to the Jumpstart portfolio. They've worked really, really hard over the last couple of years. And as everyone that signed up for this live event knows, had a very successful exit to Novartis not too long ago. And so I wanted to bring him on and talk about that experience. So for any founders or entrepreneurs that are listening in, to be able to ask Rob questions about that. What was that like? What was it like working with Jumpstart through that? What was it like with the co-founder experience with Joe? So really, Rob, I'm counting on you to carry most of the conversation. People are here to see you. And so just some housekeeping notes before we dive in completely. Please be sure to stay on mute throughout kind of the first segment here, where Rob and I are just going to be introducing him, his company. Rob's going to give a little background on his story with Amblyotech. But then there will come a time when I ask people to submit questions through the chat feature. You can raise your hand, things like that, and you can come off of mute and ask your question and engage directly with me and Rob. So until we reach that point, be sure to stay on mute. If you have questions that you just need to get out of your head, submit them in the chat feature. That way I can kind of keep track of them and decide who I should ask to speak first. That way we'll keep things fair. But without further ado, I again welcome Rob to Jumpstart Distilled Live. Tell us a little about who you are.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. So so I'm a longtime life science guy, 30 years in the business. The first 15 years I spent with companies that don't exist anymore. Well, two of the three don't exist anymore. Cyril Pharmacia, and then lastly UCB Pharma. And spent most of my time in product management. Start off in sales and then spent most of my time in product management from there. In 2006, I decided to leave the corporate world and go out as an entrepreneur. I'll fast forward to Amblyotech. In 2014, we founded Amblyotech, my business partner and I. And Amblyotech is a technology that comes from McGill University in Montreal, and it is a groundbreaking treatment for amblyopia. So what's amblyopia? Like 7 years ago, I never heard of amblyopia, but amblyopia is the medical term for lazy eye, and it's very prevalent. I learned how prevalent it was once I started working on Amblyotech. But it affects 3% of the population, and the current treatment option for amblyopia is a patch. So if you're diagnosed as a child, you have to wear a patch, depending on the severity of the condition, anywhere from 6 months to 2 years for anywhere from 2 to 6 hours a day. So it's you can imagine the compliance is pretty bad, with patching, and it's only about 25% effective. So lots of room for therapeutic improvement there. So McGill had this technology, the inventor, world-renowned researcher in amblyopia, and also had a very strong understanding of the brain. And he found that if you can through neuroplasticity, you can train the visual cortex to teach both eyes to work together through playing a series of video games that are color coded a certain way and contrast a certain way, so that your amblyopic eye sees one set of characters, your non-amblyopic eye sees another set of characters. And through an hour a day, for 8 weeks, an hour a day of playing these, literally playing video games, we could resolve amblyopia, and not just for children, but for adults who failed on therapy. So it was a groundbreaking opportunity. I feel very fortunate to be a part of it, and actually a little lucky too, quite frankly. So that's kind of leads us to where we are now.
Yeah. And I think just to give everyone context, if you're sitting there thinking, wow, that's like science fiction, like treatment technologies, when we first, met Rob and Joe in 2016, and they were talking about, well, we have a, video game that's going to literally fix lazy eye. I remember thinking like, oh my God, this is so wild. And Rob, you were early in clinical trials then, and you're still ongoing with some of those. But maybe for other founders on the call that are developing maybe a digital therapeutic, or even just even a different technology, tell us a little bit about your experience in the early days of pitching a very new, novel, really amazing, really digital device and digital therapeutic.
Yeah, sure. So we all have groundbreaking things, right? That's where we start the companies. That's where we're all entrepreneurs, and I think and I'm sure all you all have seen this too. This isn't rocket science or anything, but so our amblyopia treatment was considered a digital therapeutic, and that's kind of a term that's being tossed around now in the industry, and there's a lot of different definitions around what digital therapeutics are. But really, if you're a true therapeutic, that means that you actually treat a condition and have a physiological change somehow on the body. And that's, in our case, it was the brain and the visual cortex. So when you think about companies like Novartis, I mean, they're not, they don't sell digital therapeutics. They don't, it was such a new thing, particularly back in 2014 when we started the company, that, it was really hard to get anybody to, it was hard to get anybody to listen to us, or even believe that this worked. And we had some good proof of concept data that showed, efficacy at an early stage, but it took a lot of time, a lot of presentations, a lot of follow-up. You all know the drill in terms of, the diligence of following up with people. But yeah, it was such a different thing. It would have been, actually, I think it would have been easier to get traction earlier on if we were, if it was an eye drop for amblyopia or something like, something that people were used to. But the groundbreaking nature of it made it the reason to believe, I think, a little difficult early on.
And so I was there early with you guys when it was really difficult to get people to, again, almost believe at that time was something, science fiction-y a little bit. But obviously you hit various milestones that, garnered interest from the right partners early on. Can you talk through that experience of like who those right partners were? What was it that, that you either pitched to them that really helped them turn the corner to say, oh, wow, no, this isn't just a cool, like science fiction, new technology.
Yeah.
This is worth pursuing and putting some capital behind it. Yeah.
So I think one of the early breaks we had, I think, was, so the inventor at McGill is very well networked in the R&D space for amblyopia, and there was a group, there was a pediatric ophthalmology group that kind of latched on to our device and wanted to do some clinical research with us. So we took them up on that, and I think that gave us a lot of visibility, I think, with bigger pharma companies. Because one thing I'll say, if you want, and this is what worked for us, and I'd love to hear other people's ideas too. Am I doing all the talking? I'd love to hear from other people.
Oh, don't worry. This is my last question. So yeah, FYI, everyone, that's my last question that I'm asking. So I'm going to start taking questions from the chat. I've already got one coming in. So if you
Yeah.
have questions, just you can say in the chat, I have a question, want to ask it live. Do that, and I'll come up to your name. So Rob, finish your statement there, because I don't want you to be the only one talking this time.
No worries. So what we found is when we started working with this group of pediatric ophthalmologists, and there's not a lot in the U.S. There's only about 2,000, I think, pediatric ophthalmologists. But they wanted to work with us on research. But what really helped is a lot of these pediatric ophthalmologists also talk to pharma companies, right? They're key opinion leaders for pharma companies, and just by virtue of that, pharma companies listen to their key opinion leaders. So in our case, we'd have a physician say, hey, I'm working with this company, Amblyotech, you ought to take a look at it. So that's a great way to actually get some credible attention from big pharma if you're looking to exit that. And we weren't smart enough to think about it that way. It just kind of what happened as a byproduct of just working with a lot of key opinion leaders.
Yeah. Well, Rob, I've got my first question in, which is honestly something that you might have to answer on behalf of Joe, your co-founder, but originally finding the technology at McGill, how did you do that?
Yeah. So I'll answer that two ways. I'll answer how we found it, and I'll answer how anybody can find technology at universities. So my business partner got a call from a headhunter, actually. The headhunter was representing McGill, and I guess McGill felt so strongly about this technology that they wanted to form a company around it. So my business partner, took the call, and then he called me and said, hey, look, I got a call from recruiting. McGill wants to form a company around this technology they had. So really, that's how we found it. It was kind of fell into our lap. But generally, I'm sure all you are familiar with, technology transfer offices. And so every university that does research has a technology transfer office. So we'll just pick, University of Tennessee. You can literally Google University of Tennessee Office of Technology Transfer, and you can see the technologies they have available for licensing, and you can sift through those, and whatever you feel like has promise, you can kind of zero in on that. But every university has that. It's public information, and it's publicly available. You could start searching this evening for technologies if that's something, if you're looking for university technology. And
so if that didn't fully answer your question, I invite you to come off a mute and ask your question about tech transfer offices and how entrepreneurs can identify technology. If you're still on, Stryker, you can come off mute.
That's enough.
Oh, that's enough. Perfect. All right. Any other questions from the crowd? Again, you can raise your hand or just say I have a question and want to come off mute. All right. Well, while I'm waiting for more, oh, here we go. All right, McLean, you want to come off mute? You can go ahead.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, thanks for having us. Really enjoying this discussion.
Yeah.
I'm curious because I found that in my experience, it doesn't, it doesn't stair step. It's really like it takes a long time, and then all of a sudden a couple of things hit. And so I was curious for you, how did you go about getting traction? What was that ratio like? Was it take a year, 2 years? Was it 50 pitch meetings, and then you got the KOLs involved? Just what did that process look like from 2014 until really you started to take off?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I have to think this through a bit, the process. So, yeah, it took us a long time to get traction. It probably took us about 4 years before people started taking it seriously, as I kind of alluded to earlier. Venture, and this kind of worked out in a strange way, but we didn't raise any VC money through the whole period. So when I speak to the clinical trials that we did, 100% of our clinical trials were done through government grants. So we got very fortunate with that. And that's something to consider too, if you have a therapeutic where you still have to do some clinical work. If you can get government grants, that's great. The other money we raised, in Jumpstart, and then they were all individual angel investors. And what was great about that is it minimized our dilution quite a bit. We were able to maintain a large percentage of the company. But so so the angel rounds, we probably got 1 or 2 angel rounds a year. There was a VC that was real hot on us, and we had a small study come out, and it didn't look favorable, and they backed out at the last minute. And that was like, I felt like that was a deal breaker. It was like, oh, it was so disappointing. They backed out, and then 3 months later, Novartis called us. So I don't know if I'm totally answering your question, but if you're feeling flat though, that's not you. That's just it just takes a long time to get the traction, especially if you're I'm sure you wouldn't be doing this if what you had if you didn't feel like it was groundbreaking, right? Then the market just kind of has to catch up to you, I think.
Thank you.
Hopefully that answers your question though.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, Chris has a great question. Chris Dardeman, if you want to come off mute and ask your question live, feel free.
Sure, great. Hey, thanks, Rob. Really appreciate your time today. My question is, do you have any insights on building the company so that you're going to sell it to be easily integrated into a large strategic? And then sort of any ideas or thoughts on the selling process when you exited to the strategic? Any insights that you learned you didn't have prior?
Yeah. So, I think, and hopefully this will answer your question and stop me and if I'm not going down the path of answering your question. But so I think what was interesting in our case, and we didn't have a plan for this. It just sort of worked out this way. My business partner had more experience with exits, and I had more experience with actually launching products. So we kind of went down this dual path. I was preparing for launch. He's looking for business development partners, and it worked out. And the reason it worked out is we prepared for launching. So the first market we were going to launch in was Canada, and it's a long story. That's a whole different story. Why Canada? But we're preparing for launching in Canada. But in preparation for that, it put us in a better position for strategic to kind of look at us as more of a finished product. Even though there's more clinical work we had to do. We had to do some additional clinical work for the FDA. That's why we didn't launch in the US first. But so I think so in retrospect now, I think any advice I would have is that, you kind of prepare for both. Some people I think about it, let's sell this company as soon as we can. Some people, want to make it a lifestyle, right? And they'll want to have the company for as long as possible. But I think one thing you do control though, you have more control over your launch success than you do have over an acquisition, right? Over the exit, because you obviously can't force anybody to buy your company. I wish you could. But so I don't know, I'm kind of all over the place because it was a very good question, but hopefully there's some insight there that answered that question.
Yep. Thank you.
You're
Awesome.
welcome.
So John Wilcox and Rami Ajuri, I think I pronounced that correctly, have similar questions. So John and Rami, I'm actually going to invite you both to come off. Maybe John, you start with your come off mute. So John, why don't you start with your question and Rami add on if it doesn't totally answer what you're getting towards too.
Sure. Thank you so much. And sorry, I'm in a coffee shop right now, so there might be some background noise, but this is great information. Robert, thank you so much for all the wisdom. Really kind of just curious to know more about the story of your acquisition experience. How did they approach you? What was that whole M&A process like? We're a company that is going through a licensing business model ourselves, and acquisition is something that we could pursue in the future. So really wanting to learn more about that from you.
Yeah, sure. So
and Rob, before you hit that, Rami, does that cover enough kind of what you wanted to get out of that too?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, just as a quick preamble, I've worked at venture capitals. I've worked with strategic groups with Siemens and Johnson & Johnson and other groups. I've worked with several startups who have gone through the partnering process, and there's often a perceived short leap between a strategic partnership and an acquisition, but actually it's a much larger leap than most people anticipate. And I'm just curious from your perspective, yeah, same as the other question. Did you guys enter through a strategic partnership? And then if so, what were the kind of the forcing functions that allowed them to be comfortable moving forward with the acquisition?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's those two questions I think are pretty closely related. So so let's see. Novartis first reached out to us through LinkedIn.
Which is like, I just want to say that's not, Rob, that's not particularly common to have them reach out over LinkedIn. But just want to set that standard for others on the call.
Yeah, I guess the only takeaway from that one sentence is make sure you're on LinkedIn, I guess.
Make sure you maintain a strong presence on LinkedIn, and that you're sharing, because yes, you all were very, very good at that, is, sharing what you're doing, company updates, technology updates through LinkedIn. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think where that came from is, Novartis, as you all know, SIBA Vision was part of Novartis as well as Alcon. And so prior to Novartis reaching out to us, years earlier, we'd met with SIBA Vision and Alcon, and we got no traction with either one of those companies. So I think there was a file about our company. And I know that also Novartis does a really good job of kind of probing the early stage, technologies that are out there, early stage companies, I should say, that are out there. So literally we got, this person reached out to us from Novartis through LinkedIn and wanted to have a call, set up a calls. And I think they didn't really have an objective when they first reached out to us. We set up a meeting. We met them in Boston, and it was me, myself on our end. It was me, myself, and the inventor, and we worked hard to put together. We already had, as you have multiple presentations, but we had a really solid presentation that we rehearsed, multiple times, and Novartis was just really trying to just understand what our company was about. We went to lunch with them that afternoon, and they said, we're really impressed with you guys because you're a lot further than we thought. And I think they were looking for digital therapeutics, and I take my hat off to Novartis for this too, because they were really innovative in the way they were thinking about this, because they were actually looking for digital therapeutics. And the reason, they weren't impressed with us because we were smarter than anybody else or anything. It was just because I think they realized that we truly had a digital therapeutic. I kind of spoke to that earlier. Like, a lot of digital therapeutics aren't necessarily therapeutics. They may be data tracking systems or whatever, but this is, truly a therapeutic. So that got us off to a good start. And the inventor is, that we worked with, is very charismatic too, and just very solid, obviously solid with the science. But so I think initially, Novartis didn't have an expectation, and really we didn't either. So after we met with them, we shared our plans. We had several other calls, like, hey, we're launching in Canada. Do you want to partner with us in the launch in Canada? Maybe that could be a good pilot opportunity. And they kind of kicked that around, and then say a month or two after the initial meeting, they decided that we're going to be an acquisition target. So we never really partnered with Novartis. They just made up their mind that, hey, we think we want to acquire this company. So from there, it was a good year and a half for the due diligence process. It literally took about a year and a half for the acquisition to finally happen. But yeah, so we didn't really work with them prior to. We didn't launch with them. We didn't do anything. But the due diligence process was, as was working with them, because it was so. I mean, we put 100% of our focus into that.
Yeah. So maybe give some context. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, sorry to jump in. I just have two follow-ups, if you don't mind. So number one, I think, especially when I was working at Siemens, it was very obvious that people reaching out to these companies, you don't necessarily know who is the right person or the right decision-making department for that. A lot of people think it's VC or innovation or someone, but who is it, number one, that you guys found that was kind of that champion for you in the company that was helping you drive towards acquisition? And then number two, did they happen to share with you, what were the most attractive features, or what are the things that, really gave them the comfort to move forward? I mean, clearly you guys were pre-traction, pre-revenue, I believe. So What was it that gave them the confidence to make that acquisition?
Yeah. So no, you know what? I'm glad you brought that up too, because you mentioned a very, very important thing. So the champion, and it just so happened that the initial purchase, the initial person that reached out to us through LinkedIn at Novartis ended up being our champion. And when you find that champion, we became best friends basically, and that person gave me a lot of information that helped as we were going through different areas of the due diligence, because there's your regulatory due diligence, your legal due diligence, your clinical due, all those areas that you're managing within your own company. And I was able to get a lot of insight through that champion, and fortunately, they were open enough to want to develop a relationship back. But that helped a lot. And I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because to have a champion is everything, right? It's everything. You have to have a champion, and someone that will give you enough inside information so that it gives you an edge when you're walking into that meeting, to know what the company is actually looking for.
Cool. Awesome. I want to get to some other questions that came through in the chat. Stryker, you're welcome to come off mute and ask us, but I can also, if there's more context here, you're welcome to come off mute, but I'll go ahead and ask what you typed here around the code. Did Amblyotech have any need for a code or reimbursement at the stage at which you were, acquired? And if so, can you characterize that journey?
Yeah.
And Stryker, you're welcome to add any color there if you want to.
Yeah. So
Rob, my experience has been it's a little bit of the chicken or the egg, where many investors will say, I'm enthusiastic about what you're doing, but until you get a code and I see what the reimbursement for that is, I know that no one is going to prescribe it or buy it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when I say what was a strategy, I think many companies literally have a department that's responsible for reimbursement strategy. Tell us about getting a code and reimbursement once you had the code, or was that not something that you accomplished prior to the sale?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it is not something we accomplished prior to sale.
Or fortunately.
Yeah. And part of that is because we had Canadian approval first, and the FDA wanted us to do another trial, and that's a whole nother story. But so we focused our attention mostly on the Canadian market, and then we started to work towards the CE mark as well. But the nice thing though, and I agree with everything you said too, because investors really want to understand that reimbursement path and what does reimbursement look like, and clearly that drives adoption, when there's good reimbursement. But fortunately in our case, it was Novartis, so they they're going to be able to get reimbursement, and probably a fairly favorable reimbursement. But for the venture capitalists, though, that was something that they really wanted to understand. And we, of all the areas that we, I think we did a decent job in, reimbursement was probably the area that we didn't focus as much attention on.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. Alan Ma had a great question. So Alan, if you want to come off mute and ask your question about grant funding, that would be awesome.
Sure. Thanks for being available to us. Question specifically on the grant funding. I assume this is more SBIR funding. We're a life science tools startup and just got our first grant after 5 attempts, and would love to hear your journey through that process and how you manage it even after you got the first grant, if at all.
Yeah. So we had a close relationship with our inventor. Obviously, he was part of the company. We didn't do any STTR, SBIR grants. It was all NIH funding. And it was allotted specifically to clinical research. So that was our funding source. We got some equivalent grants from Australia, New Zealand, but that was primarily through the inventor, and he's a wizard at getting grants approved. So are you the inventor for your technology?
I'm not the inventor. So I guess context, our technology was already developed at Duke University, and we had the exclusive license out. So the NIH grant funding, I guess, already went in to develop the technology, and then we got SBIR funding to start commercialization.
Okay. Is there any other clinical validation that you have to do, or?
We're a life science tools company, so slightly different in the sense that we don't have a regulatory component. We're commercializing research kits. So I didn't want to go too deep for other viewers on the call.
Yeah, gotcha.
Cool. No, well, thank you, Alan. I appreciate it. Roy,
I'm sorry, Eller. One thing I just thought of too, back to the reimbursement question. So so one of the things we did do, actually, because I want to address that. I don't know how helpful this will be, but once we started working with Novartis, though, we did a fair amount of market research with payers to kind of get an understanding of what their willingness to pay would be. And then, you know, we triangulated that, I guess that's the term, 3 ways, physicians' perception of patients willing to pay, and then patients willing to pay if we had to go the cash route. But I think working with Novartis, so we generated enough data that we did enough market research with payers to give them, I think, a sense of confidence that our device could be reimbursed. So I thought about that after, in hindsight here.
Oh, great. Roy, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Robert. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate that. I was wondering if along the journey, if you ever had any opportunities to have a company like Novartis, invest in your as a development partner, where you might not give away equity in your company, but you might have a non-exclusive license or something to the technology in the end. And I don't know if in your world, if that's a possibility. And so I was curious about that, if along the development path, if that's a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a great option for funding, as you know, because it's most of the time it's non-dilutive funding, and then it kind of sets you up for an acquisition if the clinical work turns out favorably. We wanted to go that path, but Novartis didn't. Like I said, Novartis kind of just jumped into acquisition, but we positioned ourselves that way with other companies. We just didn't get any traction there, but we wanted to. And I think that's a brilliant way to go. Yeah. I would highly recommend that option. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sure you already knew that though, but validation. If
I just wanted to test out the idea a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Any other questions? Maybe not through the chat, but just through raised hands or anything. Anyone can come off mute if they have a question specifically. No? Okay, great. Well, I always love to try to keep them roughly around 45 minutes. So I want to, Rob, really invite you to share some advice really that I know you and I talked about the last time we talked about what can founders do to really prepare themselves, what type of resources or advisors or vendors even to kind of pull around the team, around the company in preparation for an exit like this. Again, I always love when you say like, it was really almost year and a half process of not even just working with, but almost working for Novartis to navigate that acquisition process. But I do know that you all made some great decisions early on in terms of the resources and partners to work with to really help you navigate those 12 months. Maybe let's start just by highlighting I know you and I specifically talked about your attorney, but what was it that you looked for in your attorney that you were working with that you would give advice to others listening in to do the same?
Oh, about our attorney?
Yeah. So let's start there, and then we can dive into other resources and other people.
Yeah. So we used a law firm in New York, a fairly expensive. New York law firms are fairly expensive, but what was nice about this law firm is that they're large enough where they have a nice book of business and they're constantly generating revenue, but they're actually small enough to treat us like the startup we were with zero money. So they were very gracious in deferring our billing until until the exit, which was great. If you can find a law firm that will do that, and they're out there obviously, because we were lucky to find one. That is huge because we literally didn't pay them until the exit. But one thing I want to share though, Ella, it's and I'm gonna give this is a plug, and I don't work for these folks or anything, but is anybody familiar with iCore? I mean, I can't, not like I can see a show of hands, but well, I can see some of you. So iCore, Amblyotech, we didn't go through iCore, but I would say 2015, and I'll get to the point here. In 2015, a friend of mine started a company where he had developed a biologic for the treatment of prostate cancer. And he told me about this program, iCore. And he said, look, I need a business consultant to go through it with me because he's an immunologist. So I said, sure. So iCore is a government funded program. They actually pay you to go to iCore, and it's an 8-week course. And it's really grueling. And they kind of treat you, they kind of talk down to you too by design. If you're older and you've been in the business for a long time, it's not, if you're like 22 though, it's like, like teams were crying and stuff. I mean, because they talk to you kind of like VCs, some of those hard-nosed VCs talk to you, but all that aside though, what it does is it forces you to develop a from A to Z, a full-fledged commercialization plan in literally an 8-week period. And even if you have one and your company is, I wouldn't recommend it if your company's already a couple of years old, but if you're in your first year, I highly recommend going through iCore. I wish we had done that with Amblyotech. Excuse me, but the next startup I work on, I'm definitely going to go through the iCore program. It's literally CORP, iCore. Yep. Are you familiar with that, Eller?
Yeah, and actually, so that might be, and for everyone listening in, might be an upcoming Jumpstart Distilled. We're going to bring someone in to talk about all the different government programs and opportunities like iCore, SBIR, NIH, NSF, DoD type grant, like all the sources of funding and programs that entrepreneurs can go through that is in many ways non-dilutive. Which if you can take advantage of that. And Alan, I appreciate your honesty there, and like your 5th attempt to get, for grant funding. I'm so proud of you. That's awesome. But they're fantastic. They're fantastic programs and fantastic grant opportunities, but it can be quite grueling. And so Rob, I love kind of your promoting of the iCore program, because I think it really can, it can prepare you to be very successful in those grant applications, as well as when you're talking to strategics and investors. Yeah.
And they have data actually to back up the fact that if you go through iCore, there's a higher probability of exit. More companies that go through iCore have exits than the companies that don't. It is very good. Believe me, I wouldn't recommend it if it's tremendous.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, good deal. I think we're going to wrap up here in just a minute, but again, I want to thank everyone for joining. I don't think BJ is still on. BJ Wiley-Williams, you still on? She might not be. She might have dropped off, but I saw that she joined. She is actually going to be my next guest, not on Jumpstart Distilled, but she's going to be my next guest on a quick Q&A webinar about Jumpstart Foundry. So it was great. I didn't plan for her to join, but I was going to promote her here at the end. BJ's another Jumpstart Foundry portfolio founder, just like Rob. She runs a very different company. She sells amazing wellness benefits through employers. So a totally different perspective. So if you know other founders or entrepreneurs that would be interested in hearing from BJ, I invite you to join me on March 11th. It'll be a Q&A webinar. But again, this was our first live Jumpstart Distilled. I hope you all enjoyed this. Rob, thank you so much for committing time.
And Ella, please feel free to share my email.
I will.
If anybody has any follow-up or wants to, ask anybody that didn't chime in today, I love talking about this stuff, and I love helping other entrepreneurs and also learn from other entrepreneurs too. So please feel free to share my contact info.
Absolutely. So we will send out Rob's contact info along with a recording of this if you feel like any of your fellow founders or entrepreneurs need to hear this conversation. I look forward to my next Jumpstart Distilled next month. Keep an eye out if you're not already registered for the Jumpstart newsletter. That's where we announce the next Jumpstart Distilled topic and guest. That will be on April 8th. So look in your inbox for the Jumpstart newsletter coming out next week, and we will announce the next Jumpstart Distilled. Again, we're 3 minutes before 1:45. So good job, Rob, keeping it under an hour. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you, Rob. You're awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.